Florals can be really intimidating when you're just starting out as a cookie decorator. At least they were for me. So in this video, I'm going to show you a beginner-friendly technique I call blobby swirl roses. I'll show you how to do bouquets and hearts and even how I add them to some of my character cookies. This design is so simple and has so much dimension, but if we don't get our consistency right, it's just going to fall flat. It's only one consistency for this entire design for all the colors, but it needs to be thick. It's not going to settle on itself in the bowl and go flat. It's going to have kind of an integrity to it where it keeps that puff. Little lines aren't going to settle back in. It's going to start to crust in whatever shape you put down. It will smooth out. There's no jagged edges, but it's going to stay raised, and that's exactly what we want for these puffy roses. I do use the same consistency you're seeing for everything on this cookie, but I make two separate bags of red icing. One I'm going to cut a medium hole in, that's for making the blobs, and then one is going to have a very tiny hole for making the swirls, and I also cut a tiny hole for the bow and the stems. When you pipe this out, you want it to maintain some of its shape and stay nice and puffy. It should be nice and rounded, no like sharp spikes or peaks, but if it's settling completely flat, then you should add a little bit more powdered sugar so that you can have those nice puffy roses. I have a little bouquet cutter that I got on Amazon, and I'll put the link in the description, but if you don't have a bouquet cutter, you could really do this on any shape cookie and it would be just adorable. So starting with the stems, you're going to touch a little drop of icing down and then pull across without touching your cookie. When you get to the end, touch down to the cookie again. So stick it to the cookie, lift your bag and pull across, get to the end, stick it again. We're going to fill in all of the top area of these stems, and just know that if you put wet icing on top of wet icing, it can sink into itself, so try not to touch your lines together, keep a little bit of space. I also added a couple little leaves to the background, and these are very simple, just triangles. You just pipe out the little V shape and then fill it in with the same icing. Not a whole lot of detail, just something simple to give it a pop of color. Now that we have all of our leaves and stems, we're going to start making our blobby swirl roses. So we are literally just going to put down these little blobs of icing. And the only thing you have to remember here is to leave enough space so that you can come back in and fill in another layer or two. So you're just putting down little blobs. That's it. Once you have this all filled in with your blobs, you're going to set this cookie in front of a fan for about 5 minutes, or you can just leave it alone for about 10 minutes and let the icing crust. After we've let our first set of blobs crust over, you can see the icing's not as shiny. We're just going to go back and start filling in more blobs, but make sure that you're not letting the wet icing blobs touch each other, or they will run together and form one solid thing. You may have to do this in a couple of different steps. Anytime you get to a point where you can't put any new icing down without it touching wet icing, just give it a break. I'm going to go in here and use this time to do my bow. And bows can be a little bit tricky, especially when you're doing like curved lines. So I would just say go very slowly, very intentionally, and you're just going to make a little loop, and then the two little strings hanging off. Keep adding blobs and then letting them crust, and then coming back in and doing that until you have a full bouquet. Now that we have most of our little blobs and they have crusted and they aren't wet and shiny anymore, we can go back in and add our little swirl details, which is what really makes this look like a bouquet of roses. And you'll see I put about a tablespoon of the same consistency icing into a piping bag and cut a very tiny hole. The hole that I cut in this bag is the same one that I use for the bow and the stem, and you can see it's much smaller than what we use for the blobs. You're just going to go go around and add a swirl of icing to each of those little blobs. It doesn't matter what direction you go. You just want to remember not to put the swirl on top of the blob if it hasn't crusted over, or it's just going to melt down in and become one solid thing and you'll lose all of that detail. If your blobs are not maintaining their puffiness and their shape, or you're putting the swirls on and it's kind of spreading out and it's not keeping that sharp definition, put your icing back in the bowl and add a little bit of powdered sugar, because this cookie is really simple, but if you don't have your consistency right, it's just not going to turn out. If you don't have bouquet cutters, these are adorable on little hearts. They're perfect for Mother's Day or Valentine's Day. And this really is just the perfect cookie to practice if you're a beginner. You really do want to start with beginner-friendly designs as you're getting a feel for royal icing. And two things that kind of held me back: I would watch cookie videos and see pictures, and I would attempt designs, and they just wouldn't turn out the way that they did in those pictures and videos. And I was really discouraged. But looking back, having the right consistency is probably the most important thing. And as a beginner, we tend to use consistencies that are too thin. Our icing, for example, maybe a 15-second icing, which is great for things like wet on wet, but for more detailed and puffy cookies, you want to thicken up your icing and kind of go above a 20-second icing. And some of these designs you just can't do with a 15-second icing. So if you're attempting something and it's not turning out the way that you want, don't give up. Just try and thicken up your icing. And the second thing is to cut a smaller hole in your bag. If the bag is cut with a large hole, when the icing comes out, it's just going to flatten out and spread, and you're not going to be able to do detailed things like lettering and basket weave. And some cookie designs just really do call for that thicker icing and the smaller hole combination. I wish I would have learned that a lot sooner. You can always thin your icing out if you make it too thick and rebag. It's also very easy to make a hole you cut in your bag larger. So start small and then go larger if you need to, versus the other way around. But those two things really will improve your cookie decorating. And I'm really glad that I didn't give up when I was struggling, because it does just take practice. The more time you spend, the more kind of beginner friendly designs you try and master, you start to build confidence. And I wouldn't have a business built on cookie decorating today if I didn't keep at it. I still use these little roses to add to character cookies, especially around Valentine's Day. I think they just have such a fun, innocent vibe, and they look adorable on, teddy bears and other little characters. Thank you for watching. Thank you for hanging out with me. And if you have any questions or there's anything that you want me to cover, feel free to leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for making blobby swirl rose bouquets with me.